Assalamu alaikum everybody, I pray that you guys are all very well and enjoying your beautiful Monday. Firstly, I'll just start by saying excuse me if you hear any noises of my son in the background. We're trying to get my son to sleep. He's in the other room, so he might be shouting at us and telling us off and stuff. But so if you hear my little use of shouting, then please excuse me for that. Today I very nearly changed the episode. I've very nearly changed it to being a different topic actually, because although I kind of promised and I wrote on the previous podcast in the show notes that we were going to go over Arabic vocab, which we learned from English actually, like Arabic vocab, which has ended up in English and some other languages too. A few things that are a little bit controversial in this podcast, inshallah, but I've very nearly changed it because, as I've mentioned a few times before, my premium Arabic program has launched, and that's the Arabic in 60 Steps program. All the information for it is on my website. I'll link it up in the show notes, and yeah, it's just called Arabic in 60 Steps, and basically it launched officially today. I've been so busy with it. Like, as I'm recording this right now, it's a little bit late actually. I like to kind of record these podcasts in advance, but now it's like 3 o'clock. I need to get this podcast out at 5, so I need to sit down and get it done. So I'm going to bring you some benefit, inshallah, today. We're going to cover, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 new words in Arabic, and I'm going to talk to you about how actually they've ended up in English, or some other European languages as well, and because some of them have quite a fun little story behind them. So, good. Yes, I nearly changed the podcast episode literally just to talk about what a good course is, why I think my curriculum is particularly good, some things that it's not good for, but I think I might save that for when I have one of my students on. I'm going to have one of my students as a guest on the next couple of weeks, or the next few weeks or something. I'm going to have one of my students called Chris on the podcast. He's going to be a guest, and we'll talk about my curriculum, his experience going through it and stuff like that. So, but without further ado, we'll get into the main meat of this week's episode. So, a lot of the time when I tell people that we might have words in English that come from Arabic, even people who have a pretty decent understanding of how languages work and even speak a few languages themselves, kind of have this idea that like Muslim majority languages and like Christian majority languages evolved in a vacuum. They evolved completely exclusive of one another. But of course this is false. Like where I'm from and where I'm sat right now in Cornwall, like the Cornish people have had trade with the Middle East since, well over 1,000 years ago. In fact, there was a king in Cornwall in, I don't know, the 600s or something. Actually, let me find it, because I've got the book right in front of me. There was a king in Cornwall in something like the 1600s who wrote poetry of praise of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He wasn't even a Muslim, to the best of our knowledge. The king, we don't know if he embraced Islam, but what is it? The name of the king is Ted Tidor, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and actually he says in his poem, Tidor I am called, Lord reigning in Cornwall, that Muhammad be honoured is my charge without fail, near and far. Whosoever worship another god, they shall have keen pains and likewise a cruel death. He's like, he says this in his poem. He praises the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu, and even like makes dua, makes dua in that poem. So, like here in Cornwall, we've had people having encounters with the Middle East and perhaps even becoming Muslims even before me. Down here in Cornwall. So, it's not actually that surprising that we have Arabic words in European languages, in English and in Spanish and in other languages too. So we're going to run through some examples, inshallah. So the first example is actually just a word in Arabic, and it exists in the Quran many times as well, is the word ard. And because the word ard, if you think about the letters that are in it, there's a ra and a dad in there. And in the English tongue, and generally like other European languages, would struggle to pronounce dad. Not ra. Ra exists in Spanish and exists in Portuguese, or at least in European pronounced Portuguese anyway. I know there's a guy from Brazil actually who listens to this podcast on Spotify, so big shout out to him. So if you think about the letters in that, and we think about our word earth, ard and earth, we have an r in it instead of a ra. So it wouldn't be ar, it would be and instead of dad, we don't pronounce dad, we say th. So we get earth instead of ard. I don't know how true that is. I don't know if that's a complete coincidence, but generally the Arabic teachers that I've always had, they always have some claim to any word in English. They always say, yep, that comes from Arabic. So I don't know if it's by complete coincidence, but I can kind of spot how that pronunciation could change. I can kind of spot how that could be a word originating from Arabic. Next word we have after the word earth, in the Arabic ard, is the word for Arsenal. The word Arsenal in English, I mean, here in the UK we have a football team called Arsenal. All good Muslims support Arsenal in this country. It seems like all of the Muslim communities live in that part of North London. But so basically in Arabic we have this term dar, which means like a house or a building for something. And then there's the term sana'a, dar sana'a, and then people argue that that's the word that arsenal comes from. And an arsenal, not just being the football team, an arsenal is like a reserve of weapons that you might have, or something like that. Like, if you have it in your arsenal, it's like you have it in your reserve. And that's what a dar sana'a is. It's like a manufacturing house. So, I don't know if once again this is Arabs spotting things in English that they could possibly try to make out are not actually originally from English, that are actually originally Arabic. I don't know if that's a bit of what's going on, but I think it's a coincidence, and I think it's quite funny. So, ard may be the original word for the word earth. Dar sana'a maybe being the original word for arsenal. Yeah, next word, pretty simple. Lemons, in Arabic the word for a lemon is laymoun. I imagine the word laymoun came first, and it's probably the English that was borrowed from the Arabic. I imagine that it's that way around. I think even historically, I think we know that actually lemons came to Europe because the Arabs brought them. Like a lot of our scientific knowledge and stuff as well. I mean, the scientific and mathematical knowledge, especially in geometry and astrology, those are sciences that came to Europe through Spain when the Arabs ruled Spain. And I believe they brought lemons with them as well. Awesome. Next, there's a term that we have in English. English people, and especially people who have like British military families like I do, will know this term Blighty. I think Blighty is a term that was used to refer that when the British soldiers, when they were abroad during the First World War, they would refer to their own country as Old Blighty. Blighty being their country. And the way you say my country in Arabic is Beledi. So I think those are interestingly similar. Like those are interestingly close, like Beledi and Blighty. Again, it's just a theory. Again, it's just another thing that Arabs have told me. Blighty coming from Beledi. Because they mean the same thing. Old Blighty means my country, going back to Old Blighty. Next, in English, I mean, I'd like down here in Cornwall, we don't use this slang, but it is used in other English dialects where people refer to the toilet as the kazi. I don't know if it's more of a northern dialect, the kazi. I have heard people use it, but it's not so common down here in Cornwall. But there's a place in Libya called Benghazi, and apparently it's again during or after the First World War. That place was not a nice place, and the British soldiers started referring to the toilet as the kazi, as they'd heard Arabs pronounce the name of the place Benghazi. The kazi comes from the Benghazi. I've heard many Arabic teachers independently say that is actually where it comes from, which is pretty interesting to me. Next up, we have the word for a desert. In Arabic, the word for a desert is as-sahra. It can be any desert. As-sahra is any desert. It's not just the Sahara. Like in English, we say the Sahara Desert, but in Arabic, that would be like saying the desert. As-sahra means the desert. As-sahra. So where in English we get the Sahara Desert from is actually just the Arabic word for a desert. So we'll move on to the next one as well, inshallah. So this one I like. Those of you who speak Swahili will quite like this. Oh, there's another good one as well, actually. The word Swahili. If any of you heard of a language called Swahili or know about the Swahili people, the word Swahili itself comes from the Arabic term Sahil, meaning a shore or a coast, and the plural of which is Sawahil. So the Sawahil are like the shores, and the Swahilis are like the people of the shores. And because if you look on a map where the Swahili people live, it's all the way down the shore of East Africa, and historically that's like a trade language, and it is heavily influenced by Arabic as well. There are a lot of terms in Swahili that come from Arabic, and here's one of the terms. The term safari that we have in English, and I don't know if it is actually a term they use in Swahili too, but or I'm pretty sure it is actually. Like the term safar, where safari comes from. A safar is a travel. So safari is perhaps just the term for a travel. It's like a journey in the wilderness, isn't it? When people, usually white people, I think, go to Kenya and go to Tanzania to go and look at wild animals. But safari actually comes from the term safar in Arabic, which means a travel or a journey. Next, okay, here's a good one for our Spanish brothers and sisters out there. You guys in Spain, and most of us white people have been on holiday to Spanish-speaking countries. We know that you have this traditional dish called paella, not paella, a paella. And paella, apparently, there's another theory that I've heard, which is interesting either way, is in Arabic the term baqiya means the leftovers, and paella, although it isn't cooked now with leftovers. Like if you go into a Spanish restaurant, they're not serving you leftovers. They're freshly prepared ingredients to create paella. But like I think traditionally, paella was created with like the leftover seafood and stuff, and they put it in the rice. And if you haven't seen it before, it's like they generally serve paella in a big like round flat dish, and they put a lot of saffron in it, so it goes like bright orange. It's beautiful. It's really nice, but yeah. So apparently paella comes from the term baqiya meaning leftovers. It's from the Arabic. It's from the verb baqiya, meaning to remain or to be left. Yeah, baqiya, and then the present tense yabqa or yabqi, I believe. Good. Next, in Arabic, there's a term dhata. If you say dhata layla, it means like that night, and it literally is the same as the English word that. Dhata layla, that night. Dhata yawm, that day. So literally the term that. And I think when we look at the word for that in other languages that surround English, I don't know if it is similar. I don't know if it is something that is just like an alien word that would make sense if it just came to us from Arabic. I don't know if there are similar words for that in German or in Dutch or in French or the languages that are close to us. I'm not sure, but that's quite interesting. Next, okay, I like this one. Okay, I really like this one. The next is the word in English when we say amen. Like if you grew up in a C of E, Church of England family, like I did, you probably grew up saying amen in your assemblies after the vicar does the prayer or whatever. But in Arabic, this term amen, even though in English it doesn't really mean anything other than just for that, the term ameen in Arabic that Muslims say after, for the same context really, they say ameen after you make a prayer and you say ameen. But ameen, although I don't think it's come to English from Arabic, I think it's probably come to English from Hebrew, or has perhaps come from the Hebrew tradition into the Greek and then into Latin and then into our modern speech. But but ameen actually has like a linguistic place in the Arabic language. The root amana, or the root letters, hamza, mim and nun, they actually mean to believe in something. If you're saying ameen, you're saying like you have believed in it too. Ameen. And it's in and of itself, like its root words actually belong in Arabic. It's not an alien word like it is in English. So although I don't think it's come to English directly from Arabic, its origins share a Semitic root with Arabic, I believe. Next, there's a whole video on YouTube actually, which is really nice. It might be by Bilal Asad, if that's his name. There's a da'i. I'm not sure if he's a scholar, but definitely a da'i, definitely like an Islamic speaker. I think he's from Australia or Palestinian, but lives in Australia now, called Bilal Asad, and he has a little talk. I think it's him on YouTube about where the word coffee comes from and how it ended up being pronounced the way that it is. The way that it is now, but I'll give you a little rundown of it, and hopefully I won't forget any of the details. I'll give you a rundown of it, inshallah. So, coffee its beans were originally discovered in Ethiopia by a Yemeni farmer who was in Ethiopia herding his goats, and his goats, ate his coffee beans, and obviously I imagine his goats was going a bit mental for being awake for several days, and he realised, we can probably utilise this. So he went back to Yemen and then realised that you could boil them and turn them into a drink, and then that drink, if you drank it a little bit, didn't taste quite so bitter anymore, and it was actually drinkable. And that's why as well, why the early coffee was probably very small, like we have espressos now, because to the Arabs, it wouldn't have been worth wasting water to have coffee. Do you know what I mean? Like they'd have had it very small, very powerful. They wouldn't have wanted to waste a lot of water making their coffee. So that's kind of how coffee was originally, and I don't think having milk in coffee was even a thing until the Italians got hold of it. But so the coffee culture kind of spread throughout the whole of the Arab world. And even there were even, like, during the late Middle Ages, there were priests in Rome who were saying that it's a Muslim drink, like told Christians not to drink it because it was a Muslim drink. And the Muslims used to use it to stay up late reading Quran. They used to use it to, probably for all sorts of things. Their armies probably used it to give them energy if they were going to do a dawn raid or something like that. It probably had many, many uses in that empire, and it finally got into the hands on a mass scale of people in Europe after a battle between the Ottomans and I think the battle took place somewhere where, like, modern day Hungary, and obviously in Arabic the word coffee is pronounced qahwa. In Turkish they don't say wa, they say va. They say, like, rather than qahwa, they say like kahve, I think they say in Turkish, and then that's kind of quite a clear stepping stone between where we go from qahwa, kahve, coffee. Like that's quite a clear stepping stone. The way that coffee is pronounced in Turkish is where we find our stepping stone between the way it is in Arabic and the way that it is in our Latin languages now, as being like café in the way that we pronounce it in most European and Romance languages. And and it was, I believe the Ottomans actually lost that battle, and that kind of some of the spoils of that battle were bags of coffee beans, and it got into the hands of the Europeans and they loved it, and now they've ran away with it and they've made a bit of money from it since, with Starbucks and Costa and the rest of it. But until then, I don't believe that the art of, like, creating cappuccinos and lattes and flat whites, I don't think that was ever practiced by the Muslims. I think for them it had a practical use for power, and that's all his job was to keep people awake, and it does a good job of it. So we'll move on. So from the qahwa to the kahve to the coffee one, we've got one more. This one, if you've studied Arabic to any basic level, with people who are interested in literature to any degree, you probably heard people try to convince you that the word Shakespeare, the writer Shakespeare, comes from the name Sheikh Zubair. That's probably not true. it's just something funny to think about, because Shakespeare, I mean, that's not like, well, then again, I mean, it might not be common to us, but it might have been. There might be a place for it back then, but I mean, other names like Francis does sound like a name. Like, we might have people called Francis now. There was someone called Francis Bacon back then who probably wrote a lot of what we associate with Shakespeare today. Francis does, and other names back then. But I don't know. To be honest, I think it's safer just to not try to claim Shakespeare for the Arabs. I mean, there's no need to, really. But Sheikh, as in a sheikh, as in like an old man or someone who's, we use the term sheikh for like a religious connotation, but it doesn't have to be. It's just if someone's like elderly and respectable, they are a sheikh. And Zubair is an Arabic name. Zubair. Not Jubair. There's a very famous travel writing I have in front of me, actually. There's a book written by a writer called Ibn Jubair. Not Jubair, Zubair. So Sheikh Zubair, or Shakespeare. How many have we done? Maybe 15 or something like that. 10, 15, something like that. So there are loads of words that we can talk about, that might have their origins in the Arabic language, that have ended up in Europe. But those are just some ones that are on the tip of my tongue, and I thought it'd be fun just to put on the microphone and have a chat through them with you. Very nice. So so that's it. So next week, inshallah, I'm going to try to do the episode on what makes a good Arabic program, what makes like a good study program. But it's not gonna be like a sales video. It's not gonna be like a sales podcast for my program. It is gonna be a bit broader on various approaches that you can take for studying Arabic, and I'll try to include 10 tips for students or something like that, something solid that you can take away from it. It's honestly I hate it when people are sort of very, very silly. There's nothing wrong with it if you do have something really valuable, but I don't want to be the type of person who looks like I'm only trying to sell something. I'm trying to make a living, don't get me wrong, but really I don't really do this mainly for that. Like, when I'm sat here recording these podcasts and recording my videos and stuff, the main thing in my head is there going to be a human being out there who I help? That's the main thing I'm thinking about, really. So, I'll just try to bring you as much value as I can next week in next week's podcast, and hope you're looking forward to it as much as I am. And we'll leave it there. Hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Make sure you get in touch with me. If you're listening to this on YouTube, put a comment below and like the video. If you like it, obviously. If you listen this far, I think you probably like it. If you're on SoundCloud, drop me a comment. If you're on iTunes, I think you can leave a rating on iTunes. I think that's how it works. So go and do that for me. And, please share it with people. I think there are other people who would benefit from these episodes. Please make sure that you share it with them. And, I'll catch you guys later. Take it easy, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.